Вітаємо всіх. Так, дякую всім, хто приєднався. Будь ласка, перевіряйте свої мікрофони, щоб вони були вимкнені, якщо немає запитань. І ми розпочинаємо. Нагадаю, що ви можете обирати канал, який вам зручніше. Це може бути англійська версія, англійська презентація або українською мовою. Для початку хочу нагадати, що наш проєкт – це проєкт Education USA, і скажу декілька слів про Education USA. Education USA є мережею державного департаменту і надає інформацію про навчання в вищих закладах США. Якщо ви зацікавлені у цій інформації, як отримати гранти, як отримати стипендії, які вимоги щодо вступу, фінансування, процес отримання візи, ви можете звертатися за консультацією до нас. На екрані ви бачите наші контакти, тому, будь ласка, можете їх заскрінити, зберегти для себе і звертатися за допомогою. Якщо також ви зацікавлені у зустрічах з нашими адвайзерами, то також контактуйте з нами, і ми можемо провести будь-яку презентацію для вашої аудиторії, для ваших учнів. Наш сьогоднішній проєкт – це вже третя зустріч, третій вебінар у рамках проєкту «Освіта у воєнний та післявоєнний час». І я дуже рада сьогодні представити наших нових спікерок, наших нових експерток – це Шерон і Колін. І тема нашого вебінару – програма підтримки переміщеної молоді «Строн». Перед початком хочу декілька технічних моментів з вами проговорити. Трапилося так, що багато з вас, можливо, не отримали лінк на сьогоднішню зустріч, тому, будь ласка, перевіряйте спам. Лінки були надіслані ще вчора, можливо, просто лист потрапив в спам. Якщо це так, то він знаходиться там. Якщо раптом ви не отримали, стався якийсь технічний збій, будь ласка, напишіть нам про це, і ми спробуємо якось вам допомогти, якось вирішити це питання. І також для вашої зручності ми створили невеличкий веб-сайт, на якому буде зберігатися вся інформація і всі вебінари, всі записи, всі матеріали, то ви можете з ними ознайомитися в будь-який момент. І раптом, якщо все ж таки там не отримали посилання, не отримали лінк на Zoom, то вся інформація, всі новини будуть знаходитися на цьому сайті. Цей сайт був надісланий з розсилкою вчора, але якщо ви його не отримали, то я скопіюю посилання і поділюсь ним також в чаті, можете його зберегти для себе і просто мати в доступі. На цьому сайті є опис проєкту, є загальна реєстрація і також оновлення. Тобто сьогодні у нас наш третій вебінар, його назва, дата, час і можливість приєднатися до вебінару. Тому якщо загубили посилання на Zoom або загубили лист на пошті, то на цьому сайті все буде оновлюватися і актуальний вебінар буде найпершим. Тобто наступного разу тут вже буде наступний вебінар і активне посилання на Zoom. Також ви можете вже ознайомитися з презентацією, які у нас доступні, наявні, і після вебінару ми ще додамо додаткові матеріали від наших експертів. Презентація є українською мовою, презентація є також англійською мовою. Обираєте варіант, який вам найзручніший, і можете ним користуватися. Якщо ви пропустили минулі вебінари, то також записи всі доступні і наявні разом з презентаціями. Наш перший вебінар і також другий, який був минулого тижня. В другому вебінарі у нас доступна версія і українською мовою, і мовою, тому ви можете користуватися будь-яким зручним для вас варіантом. Нагадаю ще раз, що цей веб-сайт я надішлю в посиланні, точніше в чаті, і також ще раз зробимо розсилку на вашу пошту, то ви можете його просто зберегти і потім дивитися оновлення саме там. А я хочу надати слово нашим експертам сьогодні, це Шерон і Колін. Дякую, що приєднались до нас сьогодні, і даю вам слово.
Thank you so much, Oksana, and thank you to the team for welcoming us here today. I'm Sharon Hoover, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I first just want to orient everybody to the link and the QR code that you see here. The materials, in addition to the website that Oksana just mentioned, there are the slides as well as a full manual to the intervention that we're going to be talking about today called Strong, Supporting Transition Resilience of Newcomer Groups. So all of the materials are available for free download. They're in Ukrainian, but we also have them available in English and a few other languages. So feel free, I'll share my email at the end of this. You're welcome to reach out for any other materials, but we will upload anything that you might need in this Google Drive that you see here. So I want to take a moment just to introduce ourselves. So again, I'm Шерон Хувер. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, which is on the eastern part of the United States. And I co-direct our National Center for School Mental Health in the United States. So in addition to having spent many years as a clinician in schools, I now support policy and programming for school mental health across the United States. And I'm joined today by my colleague and friend, Dr. Colin Sікеті. Colleen, would you just say hello to everybody?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Kolin Sікеті. I am also a child psychologist, and I come from Chicago, which is right in the middle of the States. I am working at Northwestern University Hospital and part of what's called Lurie Children's Hospital, which is a children's hospital in our city. And I run something called the Center for Childhood Resilience, which is a team of us that really work to try to bring mental health supports to kids where they live, learn, and play. So very grateful for the opportunity to talk with all of you today and to share this curriculum that Sharon and I have been working on together for quite some time now. So thank you for the opportunity to work with all of you and get to know you a little bit today.
Thank you, Colleen. So I first just want to start by describing my connection to Ukraine and some of the work that we've done for the past several years. In 2014, I had the privilege of joining a small team of psychologists who came over to work in Kyiv and Lviv. We were working at that time with schools and with mental health professionals who were supporting students as they were coming back to school after the Maidan Revolution and some of the struggles that were happening in Ukraine at that time. And we were there for over a week. I met many wonderful educators and mental health professionals. And I also met many young people in the schools, as well as school administrators and teachers. And my heart is with Ukraine. I really fell in love with your country and the people there. And I have to say, was really heartbroken by the invasion, which now, of course, is over a year old, and have stayed in touch with many of my colleagues, including Dr. Ola Romanchuk, who was on the prior slide, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist based in Lviv. And late February, early March of last year, 2022, he and some other colleagues that we've worked with for the past several years reached out and said that they were, of course, stunned, overwhelmed, and just experiencing tremendous adversity in the context of the invasion. And how could we be supportive? So what we've done over the last year plus is really work with not only Ukrainian educators and mental health providers, but also some of the neighboring countries to Ukraine. So in March of last year, a team of us came over to Eastern Poland. These are some pictures from that time. And as you know, many young people and families, especially mothers, were coming into Poland at that time, as well as many other nations. And we were working with some of the families as well as mental health providers and educators. And this was just one of the illustrations from one of the children that we were working with at that time. We also came back to Eastern Europe, and we're working in the Czech Republic back in September of last year, where we introduced Strong, which we're going to be talking about today, supporting transition resilience of newcomer youth. And a team called the Society for All, or SOFA, is responsible for bringing many of us over to provide training to not only Czech psychologists and educators, but also many Ukrainian educators and psychologists who had come into the Czech Republic. And so we came in September, and then again, Colleen joined me for the most recent visit in just a few weeks ago. So again, we've had the privilege of working with Ukrainian leaders in mental health and education, and are so pleased to see so many of you here today, and are hoping that we can provide materials that can be useful to you in your work. We're going to just be doing really an overview of Strong today, a little bit about how and why it was developed, a little bit about the research that we have so far on Strong, and then we'll just touch on the content of Strong. But there are some Ukrainian psychologists who've been trained to provide training in the intervention if anybody is interested, and we'll also leave our email in case anybody is interested in more information, since we just have a short time together today. I do want to thank our interpreters today, Natalia and Anna. This is a couple of pictures of when I was in Ukraine back in 2014, working alongside interpreters then, and I'm always amazed by their expertise in being able to translate the material. We couldn't do this work without them, so I just want to thank our interpreters today, and just really grateful for their presence with us. So I do want to just make a note about self-care. We know that today we're going to be talking about childhood trauma and adversity, and the adversities that families go through in the context of war and displacement. And as helping professionals, whether you're a teacher, a school leader, a mental health professional, we know that it's really important to take care of ourselves in that context, because we know we are at risk for secondary traumatic stress or vicarious traumatic stress. And many of you may also be going through your own traumatic stress and adversity during this time. So I just want to take a reminder to take care of yourselves now during this presentation, and of course, in all of the work that you do. So when we do the Strong intervention, it is a 10-session group that we do in schools. It's primarily intended for young people who have moved to a new school or community, or even to a new country. And we do warm-up activities in every session. So we did want to start all of us with a warm-up activity. This is called a rose or a bud. And it just gives us, and in our Strong group, it gives the students an opportunity to be grateful or to express gratitude for something that happened this past week, or something that they are looking forward to in the coming week. So even in the context of adversity, we know that gratitude is important. So I just ask you all to take a moment to share one rose or a positive thing that happened over the last week that's already happened, or one bud, which is something that you are looking forward to over the next week. And you can share that in the chat box. So we invite you to share in the chat anything that was positive over the last week, or that you're looking forward to over the next week. And thank you for starting us out. And please, we invite you to keep those coming in the chat. We'll also invite you to ask questions in the chat, and we will leave time at the top of the hour at the end for questions as well. Thank you. I see some messages coming in, and we see that some of you are saying that you have new students. So thank you for keeping those messages coming in. I do want to acknowledge that Strong was first developed in partnership with our colleagues in Ontario, Canada. This was in the context of the Syrian refugee crisis back in 2017. They had many, many Syrian students, as well as students from other nations, coming into their schools. And a part of their Ministry of Education, called School Mental Health Ontario, that supports mental health in schools across their province, decided that they needed some additional support for their students. So we worked closely with them, as well as with our partners in Chicago at Colleen Center for Childhood Resilience, as well as with many of the newcomer communities in both of our countries, in the United States and Canada. We have a broad authorship team for Strong, so I want to acknowledge all of our authors and co-developers. And we invite you to be a part of the Strong team. So again, the materials are available for download. We encourage you to use them if you think they'll be helpful for your students in your schools. And we would love to hear about any implementation efforts or any suggestions that you have for the manuals. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Colleen, who's going to talk just a little bit about the development and background of Strong.
Thanks, Sharon. So we want to talk just a little bit about how Strong came about. As she mentioned, the work originally started in Canada, but it was on the back of learning a lot about trauma and also resilience and what happens when folks move from place to place. So when we start this, we want to think about why schools first and foremost. And the reason that we really do that is that we know that schools are an awfully important place as kids transition. It can be really a critical support for them. And it really does a place where intervening early can reduce the stigma and get kids engaged and moving forward, trying to stabilize. We also want to think about the fact that schools are an early place for intervention because often it's very difficult for kids to get to mental health services, particularly in a crisis. So having services available where they are is really critical and also builds on what schools are meant to do, which is to really maximize the development of kids across multiple sectors. So the way that we often think about providing supports in schools is with this triangle. This is the triangle that we think of as the multi-tiered system of support, which is really thinking about how do we start with that universal core and make sure that all students get what they need to be successful in whatever the subject is, if that's reading or if that's your social emotional skills. And then we look to build up beyond that if we feel like there's kids who need more targeted supports or actually individual services. We think of Strong as primarily in that tier 2 space, a space for kids who might be showing some signs of distress or that you're concerned about, but we've also seen it being used universally, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well. So one of the things that we've done is to think about how to take the MTSS triangle and create what that should look like specifically for newcomers. So the translation here, if you know English, is for welcoming, welcome and well-being. We consider the tier 1. That's how we get all students and staff to understand what it looks like to create a warm environment where if you're new, you feel like you immediately fit in. There's signs in your language. There's maybe ambassadors to welcome you. But then we want to think about those coping strategies. That's where we're looking to build resilience, build on the foundation of what kids brought with them from their home countries and their own families and what they've learned, but also start to prepare them if there's some challenges. And then finally, the mend piece is where we think about that mental health. So if you have students who really are struggling, if they're not able to function in all the ways that they and their families want them to, maybe they are not sleeping or they're not engaging with social activities, those would be the kids that we'd want to be thinking about in that tier 3. So again, just going quickly through these to make sure everybody's on board, that universal is really what we call creating that welcoming school environment. That's really where, if any of you are leaders, that's where we are asking the principals and the leaders and the superintendents to create that welcoming signs, to have strategies in place to educate both the children and their parents about what school looks like in your community, what are the kinds of supports they can expect, what are some of the activities that will be in place for them to both make new friends and to create new culture, but also to highlight the culture that they've brought with them and give them opportunities. So that welcoming school environment, this is just an idea of how the folks in Ontario did this. They had spent a lot of time through the group that we worked with up there, creating those welcoming environments. But when they came to us, they were looking for, well, what do we do when the environment is not enough? So the next slide is thinking about how to help the teachers to do that. How do we get teachers to do the things that they need to do in the classroom to be welcoming? And then we also wanted to highlight this slide, the next slide, which really talks about why this particular perspective is so critical. Both Sharon and I train in trauma interventions, but we wanted to be clear from the very beginning with Strong that while some of these kids may have experienced some very traumatic and stressful events, that we see Strong as really building on their natural ability to bounce back and to be resilient. And these are just some quotes to share with you of some of the students in Chicago when we asked them, what did they want people to know about them? These were some of the feedback that we got. Be kind and encourage us to speak up. Help us understand how things work. Help us understand how to find our locker. Help us with translations. But also, I want to be able to have fun and don't cry. I want to be able to enjoy being in this space with you. So these are just a few quotes for you to take a look at. So again, when we do tier 1 well, we're hopefully really increasing kids' ability to generally adjust to the new setting. But if we have concerns, then we want to be thinking about what might be some coping strategies for helping them be successful. So in those ways, we want to really think about, like I said, building on the strengths and supports they brought with them, but also helping them understand that it's okay to express emotions. It's okay to ask for help. And we want to try to get them back into maintaining their own cultural identity while also thinking about what they might be doing in this new country, maybe a new skill that they could learn, or this new setting, some new friends they can make. So as we're going through this, just think about some of your students who've come in and some maybe been transitioned, or your own children, if you are in the process of transitioning yourself. What are some of the things that are already in place in the schools that you're working in, or the students are attending, that might be, we could build on? But then again, we also want to make sure that we understand that there might be some adjustment difficulties. So we want to make sure that all of the educators in the building are looking for some of these things. We want to make sure that while they're creating as much stability as possible, they're setting up their classrooms and having schedules. We know kids like school in part because of the structure. Structure and predictability is important for all kids, but it's especially important when you're going through a difficult adjustment. So we want to make sure that the teachers are being as helpful as possible to make clear what the expectations are and to help those students to make it through. When we see some challenges, what are some of the things we want to focus on? We want to really focus on what we consider cognitive behavioral therapy. Some of you may be familiar with that. It's an intervention that relies on helping kids change some of how they're thinking about the situation they're in and some of the behaviors that they're doing so that they can be able to manage difficult situations or emotions that might feel overwhelming to them. And the key strategies of CBT are listed on this slide. And what we're going to be doing is we walk through the intervention is to show you how it is that Strong builds on that. The critical thing to see here is many of these skills are also skills that we would want all kids to learn. So how do we calm ourselves down? How do we cope when we're given a challenge? How do we set goals, even when they're scary, and then work to get ourselves through those challenges and to problem solve? And so those are the core parts that you're going to be hearing about a little bit today as we go forward. So as we're doing that,
so
again,
I'm going to jump in here, Colleen.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, no, all good. So we just want to go over again kind of where Strong came from in Ontario. And you know, they were experiencing, as I said, a lot of new students coming into their schools. We know that many of the neighboring countries around Ukraine are in a similar position right now. And even within Ukraine, we understand that there's a fair amount of displacement of young people and families who've had to flee their homes. And so similarly in Ontario, they were having a number of new students come in. And so they had teams that were set up to monitor the students coming in and to have newcomer rounds with families to understand how they were experiencing the transition. They had cross-ministry planning tables, meaning they had education and mental health and health coming together to try to figure out how to best support young people. They also had a number of support functions in place. They had education materials for educators, for example, to help them understand newcomer experiences. I imagine many of those things are happening right now as well for Ukrainian students coming into new schools and communities. And some of the main messages at that time were that when we can help families settle into a new community, it can promote mental health. We want to take a strengths-based approach and not only focus on trauma and adversity, but still be attuned to the trauma that young people and families may experience. And we want to equip as many people in the welcoming community as possible with information about how to understand or see the signs when young people are struggling. So we expect that there is always going to be struggle with the transition through the migration process. At the same time, young people come with tremendous resilience, and they may adapt in a healthy way to a new environment. But that being said, many young people may experience difficulties down the road. And so we want to make sure adults are equipped to recognize this and to know the local pathways to care. So these were all important messages, but they weren't sufficient to getting young people the supports they needed. And very quickly, the school system in Ontario was saying that they needed additional support. They were seeing students who were struggling. The students were coming to their teachers, telling them stories of their traumatic experiences about their migration process, and the teachers really didn't know how to navigate that. So they really wanted to put together an intervention that could be delivered in schools, because young people also were not making it out to traditional mental health settings. So at that time, we established a partnership with School Mental Health Ontario, as well as our national center, Colleen Centre for Childhood Resilience, and the Centre for School Mental Health in Canada, which is based at Western University. And really, we had a collaborative, iterative process to develop the strong curriculum. We worked with members of the newcomer community, and we focused on trauma studies, resilience studies, positive youth development, as well as what we knew about newcomer and immigrant mental health. We wanted to design something for the school setting. And there were a number of studies looking at newcomer experiences in general, but there were very few studies that looked specifically at how schools could support newcomer youth. And there was a strong evidence base for trauma interventions in schools. So we worked with the literature that we had to come up with the intervention that you're going to hear about today, called STRONG. These are the goals of STRONG. So it's really not just to focus on adversity and trauma, but really at the outset to focus on resilience and promote healthy adjustment to a new school and country. We heard very clearly from the newcomers arriving to Canada that they did not want these supports to start with a trauma checklist or immediate focus on trauma and adversity. They wanted time for their young people to be able to foster relationships with the educators and mental health providers, and to really have a place to talk about the strengths and the supports that they had through their migration process and how they could foster those strengths in their new community. We also wanted to increase connections within the STRONG group and develop newcomers' strategies, or just enhance their strategies to cope with the stress that they're experiencing, build problem-solving and goal-setting skills, and also really increase their sense of identity and buffer them from some of the impacts of xenophobia or racism that they may experience as they transition to a new country. There are a number of theories that underlie STRONG, but one of the main things that we want to keep in mind is that it's really typical for anybody, young people and adults, to experience mental health challenges as they go through a migration process, especially in the context of war and displacement. And so we wanted to reframe mental health challenges as being something that's really a normal byproduct of the very stressful and unnatural situation that they have been put in, versus something innate to the individual. The STRONG structure is, as I said, 10 group sessions and an individual journey narrative session where the mental health clinician in a school, or sometimes an educator in a school, runs the 10 groups and then meets with the child individually to go over their migration journey. There's also a parent session and a teacher session. And as Colleen mentioned, STRONG really fits somewhere between tiers 1 and 2. And it's designed to support the well-being of any newcomer students, because there are often so many newcomer students coming into schools. Sometimes schools have decided to select a smaller group of those newcomers, especially those who may continue to struggle after their transition or may benefit from additional coping skills. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Colleen, who's just going to tell you a little bit about what we know so far from the research and evaluation of strong implementation in the United States and in Canada.
Absolutely. So as Sharon has pointed out, this work has been done in collaboration with colleagues from the Center for School Mental Health in Ontario. And so if you're interested in looking up more information, you can go to that website. I also believe that we have more information about evaluation on our own Google Drive that we're sharing with them. So in terms of what we were looking for, what we were really trying to do initially was to determine, is strong something that is able to be delivered in schools? Is it acceptable to the clinicians? Do they feel like it's helpful? Do they feel like it's something feasible for them to do in the middle of all their different work? And so the initial studies that we did, the data showed that in fact it was, that people found like it was useful. They found that it was something that they could fit in. We've got some really nice videos of people sharing their experiences with Strong that we can also, you can take a look at if you go to the Strong website. We also tried to talk to the young people. Obviously, we want the adults to feel like it's helpful, but we also want to know what other people think. When we talked to the clinicians, they said to us, they felt like they saw more connections, that kids that were in school but maybe not connected were starting to be more connected. So it had this experience of not being alone. The other thing that we found was that they had come with skills, but that they really did learn some strategies, particularly relaxation strategies were something that we've heard multiple times in multiple settings are particularly helpful for kids and their parents to be able to adopt some of these practices in their home. The other thing that one of the kids shared with us is just this idea that we now have tools in our toolbox to help us so that when something's scary or there's something that's happening that they can make themselves stronger. So I think the critical goals are really are out there in terms of I've learned to like myself and to realize how strong I am. I've also realized that it's okay to ask for help. And so you can take a look and read these quotes at another time. But I also wanted to share with what the clinicians shared with us. What the clinicians shared is that they felt that it was really professionally one of the most gratifying things that they've done. It helped them to understand the newcomer experiences that their students were having that time to sit and connect with them and really develop a special relationship. They felt like the CBT strategies that are included in the Strong curriculum were useful to them. And so they felt like they got to really practice with that. And they felt like we recommended doing the group in pairs so that you have someone who can support all the students, particularly if there's language issues. And they also brought up that it really helped them to feel like they were not only learning themselves, but they had a partner to connect with to try to do this even better. So there's some research literature out there. Certainly, you're more than welcome to go take a look. And we are still in the process of studying it as we speak. But we also have enough evidence now to believe that doing this work will be ultimately supportive for your clinicians, yourselves, and your students. So I think we're back to you, Sharon.
Okay. So we did just want to share with you a little bit about kind of some of the content that we share in the training. So we won't go into great depth here, but we want to give you a sense of what we go over with people who are trained in Strong. So we do spend a fair amount of the first day talking about newcomer experiences, and we invite really anybody from the school to participate in that, because we want to make sure that it's not just the mental health professional or maybe the one cultural liaison who is in the school supporting mental health, but that everybody in the school sees themselves as ambassadors for mental health and well-being for the newcomer students. So we go over terminology, and we won't go into all the details here, but we find that it's helpful for the welcoming adults in a school and even the students in the school to understand the distinctions and the language to better understand newcomers and their experiences. We also go over the reasons for migration. We understand in the context of the Ukrainian invasion, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that there's war and displacement is the primary driver of migration right now. There are also other drivers that can lead to individuals and families leaving their country. So we go over some of that. We go over both the push factors, why people flee, and also sometimes the pull factors for why people flee their home countries. And then we spend time talking with our trainees about the post-migration context, because we certainly recognize that in addition to the adversity and trauma of fleeing one's home country and the stress that they may have gone through in their home country, there's certainly a number of stressors post-migration, including many losses and adjustment difficulties, including adjusting to a new culture, including discrimination, including, when families are moved to a new living situation that they're unfamiliar with. And, I can tell you, when we were in Eastern Poland back in March of last year, many of the mothers were really feeling unsure about whether to send their children to school, because they recognized that it was going to be quite difficult for their children to learn the language, and they had great hopes of coming home to Ukraine. And so there were a lot of struggles with the loss of their home country, and also trying to navigate as a parent what would be best for their child's adjustment. We also go over the psychological experiences of migration, so what happens in the family, but also some of the acculturative stress that we know occurs. And we go over the psychological experiences that young people may experience during that migration process that can also be impacted by the political context of what's happening in their nation and in the welcoming nation or community. We spend some time also talking about potential traumatic experiences that young people go through, and we illustrate how this can play out at pre-migration, during migration itself, and also at post-migration during settlement process. And you can see that there are many things that we see happen during the migration process. Certainly not all experiences are similar, and every migration experience is unique, but some of these are the things that we see. And we know that COVID certainly has a layering negative impact on all of this. So one of the things we also know is that mental health may be a challenge for young people who've been through the migration process. They are at greater risk of post-traumatic stress and depression and anxiety and behavioral challenges. But we also know there are substantial barriers to newcomers actually accessing mental health services for a variety of reasons, including mental health supports are not always the priority when basic needs are trying to be met by a family. There's also language barriers and stigma and lack of familiarity with the pathways to mental health care. One of the things that we want to keep in mind, and you may have noticed that we're talking a lot about strengths-based care and strengths-based supports, is that in addition to the mental health challenges that our newcomer students experience, they also demonstrate tremendous resilience in the context of the adversity that they're experiencing. And the quote that you see here is one that one of our students shared, that I think just speaks to the idea that while they may not speak the language of the new country, this particular student spoke 6 other languages and really was saying, please notice my strengths and please don't take pity on me. So it's important as we're supporting our newcomer students that we are really highlighting their strengths and leveraging those versus seeing the deficits that a student may have. So these are some of the quotes from our students. And we want to make sure that we are not coming from a deficit focus, but rather coming from a strengths focus. So as we're talking about this with our trainees in Strong, we talk with them about what are the newcomers that are served by their schools, what adjustment issues have they seen, both for students and for their families, and then what are the strengths of their newcomer students. So I would love for you all to take a moment in the chat to just share some of the adjustment challenges that you've seen as students are migrating to new schools and new communities and maybe even new countries in your context, but also some of the strengths that you've seen. So just take a moment in the chat to note some of the adjustment difficulties you've seen, but also some of the strengths that you have witnessed in the children and families that have gone through the migration process. And while you're doing that, I'm going to have Colleen just speak about self-care for a moment.
Absolutely. As Sharon mentioned at the beginning, we know that in order to be there for our students and to support them through difficult times, it's really important that we think about how do we take care not just of our students, but also of ourselves. So a concept that we talk about quite a bit is the concept of compassion satisfaction and compassion fatigue. So we really want to remember that this work is a calling for many people. Compassion satisfaction is really why we do the work that we do. It's often tied to being kind of a natural helper. It's tied to feeling satisfaction when you see other people grow and be successful and heal. But the challenge is that if you are someone who cares deeply about your work, it's also really easy for you to fall into what we consider to be the opposite side of this, which is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is really an occupational hazard of being in our field. It can be actually feeling some of the symptoms that our clients or our students are sharing with us. And it also can be just a sense of overall exhaustion. And so what happens when we get to that point, we often overcompensate and try to push ourselves harder, but that just doesn't work. So what we recommend instead is to really be thinking about these sort of signs of both coping and also fatigue. So we know each of you is an individual. We all know ourselves. There are days when we all feel like perhaps this bowling pin that people are coming at us, and we just can't, all we have to do is sit there and take it. But one of the things we ask you to do is to pay attention to the cues in your body that your body is starting to have stress, whether that you're someone who feels it in their head or their stomach or their thoughts. And then what we'd ask you to do is look at those constructs of physical, cognitive, emotional, personal, and workplace, and think about how might you actually build in coping strategies that are aligned with where your body most feels stress. So as you're thinking about this, I know we just asked you to think about what your kids are going through. Also take some time to think about what are some strategies that you might be using. I noticed some of you are already on spring break. I don't know what your weather looks like, but maybe it's just making more time to get outside and take some walks. Maybe it's having time to check with a colleague. But we'd like you to be thinking about how you build that in so that you can keep doing the work that you do. Okay. Then we're going to jump ahead and just go through the manual. As Sharon mentioned, this is not a full training. What we're hoping to do is to just share with you how Strong works, to give you a chance to take a look and figure out if it's something that you could bring some of these constructs in your work already, or if you might be interested in learning more. So the key thing to know is that this manual has laid out all of the sessions. As she pointed out, there's 10 sessions. So this is just a slide with all of the content for the first sessions and then the second set of sessions. You'll notice in this that in addition to the group sessions that go 1 through 10, there are also some additional sessions, and Sharon's going to walk through what those specific things are in terms of some individual supports for young people in an individual meeting, and also some information that you can have prepared from us as the Strong authors to share with both parents so they understand what's happening and teachers. So we're going to walk you through that step by step. Meanwhile, thank you for those that are putting in the chat all your coping strategies. I love seeing things like going for a walk and listening to music. Some of you combine those two, listen and walk, playing with your kids, playing with your dog, right? These are all the things that people do to bring themselves back into the moment. We often find that mindfulness of being able to leave behind the stress of your work and then be present so that you can get your body and your energy focused on moving forward for the rest of your day. So thank you for sharing those. I do believe it's especially important for you all who are living in the middle of a very stressful environment to remember that line that we say, which is you can't help someone else until you help yourself. So just like the oxygen and the airplane, remembering that as you're helping your students to also take care of yourself. So we appreciate people sharing some of your strategies.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead and walk them through the manual.
Yes, and There was a question in the chat about how is it possible to study under the program. So at the end, we'll share our contact information. And if there's enough interest in having a training, we can certainly try to figure that out. We could do a training virtually. We've also trained a number of Ukrainian psychologists and educators while we've been over in Eastern Europe, including in Poland and the Czech Republic. So there may be an opportunity to engage them as trainers if people are interested. So as far as the actual manual, I do want to thank the Society for All. You see SOFA in the bottom corner here. They have done the translation into Ukrainian, and each of the modules is included individually in the drive that in the Google Drive that we shared at the beginning, and we'll share that again at the end. But for each of the modules or sessions, there is an outline with the objectives and the materials that are needed for that session. Each session has several sections, and you'll see that there are scripts in italics, which is really guidance for the strong facilitator to say as they are leading a group of students. And then there are descriptions of the activities for each of those. There are tips sections. So you'll notice at the bottom of the manual pages, there are specific tips to help strong facilitators implement. There are also a number of worksheets throughout the manual that students use to do the actual activities. And there is a relaxation exercise at the end of every session, along with handouts for the students to practice those at home. And there are also parent handouts, and the parent handouts are available in a number of languages as well, so that the parents can engage in this. At the end of every session, there's also a rating form that can help the strong facilitator to keep track of how engaged the students are and how they're functioning in the group and whether they might need some extra support. These are some of the materials that we use for every session, including expectations for the group and a feeling thermometer and what we call the thoughts, feelings, and actions triangle. There is a student eligibility checklist, although every school may have their own way of determining how students get invited to be in the strong group. We left it quite open. Students had to be a newcomer. So in other words, they were new to the school or the community or the country, usually because of an immigration process. And there's a place for the referring person, whether it's the student, the family, or a teacher, or a mental health provider, to indicate whether the student is struggling in any area, psychosocially or academically, or whether they might benefit from additional coping skills. So we are going to just take the last few minutes to very quickly walk through the sessions and just highlight the couple of activities within each of the sessions so that you have a sense of what is in the actual manual. So Colleen will do the first couple of sessions.
Yes. So as we mentioned, we start out, this is a group like any other group that you might have done. So we want to think about getting folks settled into the group, understanding the expectations, understanding that this is a place where they're going to be coming every week, and make sure one of the key messages we've heard is to make sure that they understand that their teachers know they're doing this so that they don't worry about missing any of their homework. So in the first session, like we did just a few minutes ago, we often do a warm-up activity like the Rosebud, or every session will tell you a different one that you're welcome to try. We try to keep these as sort of just getting to know each other, maybe having some people start talking a little bit, just sharing and having it be low risk. We also talk about group expectations right from the beginning. So we want to make sure that the kids know that this is a safe place and what to expect. So the importance of kind of being together and creating that safe space, and something about privacy is something that we also like to mention so that kids understand that we want this to be a place where kids can come and share some of the things that they're thinking, and that we ask them to respect that and not share other people's stories. We do say it's okay to share with your family what you've learned. In fact, we encourage you to do that and go back with the little sheets and share what it is that you have been learning. So those are the kind of the structural things that we get set up right from the beginning in the very first session. And then the next thing that we start to do is doing exactly what we've talked about. We want to make sure that these kids recognize right from the beginning that they have a lot of strengths, that regardless of how stressed they are right now or all the challenges they face, that they come with strengths. So we talk about and give them an example of what inside strengths look like. And then we ask them to actually do an activity where we get them to think about and draw where their inside strengths and then their outside supports. What are some of the things that they have with them? So right from the beginning, they're prompted to do that. And then we start on that first session with the most basic of relaxation exercises, which is we walk them through how to do deep breathing. You'd be surprised if you haven't taught deep breathing, how many kids actually don't know how to do it. When you tell them you want them to breathe deeply, they'll take a huge breath of air up in their chest and just hyperventilate, like, and what we want to do is actually get them to slow that down, to start seeing that deep breathing is actually in through your nose and then out through their belly with a slow count. And we get them to model and practice that. And as you'll see, each session, they go home with actually a practice sheet and we ask them to try that relaxation. So over the course of the first 5 weeks, they'll get a new skill every week, and then they'll be able to decide which ones really work best for them. So that's all that we do in the first session. In the second session, the real focus of this is understanding stress. So we jump back in with another warm-up activity, like I said before. And then we're going to review a little bit of what we talked about the last time. And then we're going to start to get them to think about a different part of themselves, which is where do they feel stress? Getting people to understand that bodies can manifest stress in different places, that we're all a little bit different. But we want them to understand that if they can recognize where stress happens, they can then learn how to manage it. So in this second session, we're introducing where do you feel in your body? And we're introducing this cognitive behavioral triangle, which we bring up again and again throughout this manual. And the idea behind this critically is the idea that how you think about an event will impact how you feel and the choices that you make. So we introduce the triangle, we show them, we give them an example of a kid who's super confident in a situation and how they might feel about that, and a kid who's maybe a little bit more worried, and help them understand that. Then the second skill is taught, which is muscle relaxation. Again, this is one that's fairly easy for kids to learn, where you ask them to actually identify different muscle groups by tightening them and then relaxing them. And a lot of kids really like this because it involves both physical and cognitive skills. So this is one of the more appealing of the relaxation strategies. Bouncing to Sharon for the next set of sessions.
Great. And we recognize we're going quickly through these, but you have all the materials. So session 3 is about common stress reactions and understanding feelings. We have a warm-up activity that's fun for the students. We then review the thoughts, feelings, and actions triangle again, and we talk specifically about newcomer experiences that they might encounter. We have a discussion about common reactions to stress and trauma. And we have some adaptations for our elementary students, including this book, A Terrible Thing Happened, which I believe we have a video in Ukrainian of reading that book. We also spend time on identifying feelings and how students might feel in different situations, including those they might encounter as a newcomer. Again, we have elementary adaptations of that. And then we close with a body scan for relaxation. In session 4, we focus on supporting students in terms of measuring and managing their feelings. We do the rose or bud exercise that we did at the outset of today's session, and we have a different one for our elementary students. We then introduce the feeling thermometer, where students measure their feelings, and then we have them spend time going through thoughts and actions to help lower their feeling thermometer, or to help lower those feelings of distress. And we close with a drawing, with an imaginal relaxation exercise where they think of a calm place. Colleen, 5 and 6 and 7.
All right, so we are doing a lightning round here. I think the important thing to know is in sessions 5 through 7, we're taking a lot of the work and focus on how do we shift in our thinking. So in session 5, we're doing a talking about, again, a warm-up, and then we move into the idea that thought, part of the triangle, is something that you actually have more power to control than you realize. So we walk through some examples. You can see this little girl who's got her head on the table. She's thinking about homework versus a girl who's maybe sitting up and working on it, so that they can see the same situation can invoke different feelings, but it's also different thoughts. So that's a really important kind of construct that we keep coming back to. We ask them to challenge their thoughts. We get into the idea of being a thought detective or investigator who's trying to figure out, why am I thinking what I'm thinking, and getting people to decide, are there other ways? What information do I need to seek out? For the little ones, as Sharon mentioned, we have some really nice younger versions. So the idea of being a super thinker, like a superpower, is introduced. And the idea of, kind of how do we move that forward with the littler kids in a slightly different way. So in that session, the relaxation exercise is actually drawing. Maybe you might play some music. I noticed a few of you do drawing in your own self-care. So that's an important one to teach our kids, especially those kids who like to do, not just to think. So that's really important. When we get to session 6, we're starting to move to the part of the triangle where we talk about not just how you're feeling and thinking, but what can you do if something's important to you? So we introduce the concept with a warm-up activity, like we said. We're getting into some just fun, imaginary things. And then we're starting to teach them about something that we call SMART goals, which in English spells the word SMART: specific and measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. And the idea is basically just to help them set a goal that they can actually work step by step to achieve. And we introduce this idea of a ladder to success, or steps to success, in which we ask them to try some little step in that direction first. And then as they get a little bit more confidence and realize that they're able to do it, then they move up that step. So we use this as a way to really help them understand that even little challenges that they're having and big challenges can be broken down, and you can move through them with some support. We specifically talk about something called avoidance, which is when maybe something that you really want to do, but there's something about it reminding you too much of what you miss, or maybe it's a person that you really would like to talk to, but you just are afraid you're going to cry if you talk to them. Those kinds of things, we sort of help them look specifically and apply that same problem-solving map too. So we get them to think about goals of what they want to do, maybe one thing that they'd like to do in this school year that they can try to accomplish. And then we introduce them to the idea that by this time they've learned all these new relaxation strategies. So each one of these little pictures on here is a reminder of a different relaxation strategy, and we get them to teach each other. So one person is the leader. Session 7 really builds on that. It's really moving from all of the different challenges they might have and really moving into a problem-solving approach. So the warm-up activity here is a superpower. If you could have a superpower, what would it be? And then we get them to really think about how different situations that they're in, different actions that they can take, can have different outcomes. And we want them to start learning how to think about any choice they get to make. They want to think about the pros and the cons and make a plan based on what they think is best for them now, but hopefully also in the long term. So there's a younger version, elementary version. There's also a high school version in which we get them to think about the pros and cons in a little bit more detail. And then we actually have them act it out. One thing that cognitive behavioral therapy teaches us is that you have to actually practice what you learn. So we get them to do that and act out some of the challenges they're in, which the kids really do enjoy. And I'm going to hand it over to Sharon to talk about the individual.
Great. And I know we're at the top of the hour and we wanted to open it up for questions. So while I just take the last couple of minutes talking about the final sessions, if you have questions, we would encourage you to place them into the chat so that we can answer any questions that you all have. But we just want to wrap up with some of these final sessions. So we do have an individual session with every student where the student is encouraged to share their journey narrative. This is different than a trauma narrative where the focus is specifically on the trauma. This is an opportunity for students to really share their entire journey narrative, pre-migration, migration, and post-migration, and to talk with the strong facilitator about some of the strengths and supports that they used along the way. So there's a menu of questions, that we can use with students to help them share their migration story. And during that migration or journey narrative, we also do spend some time asking about post-traumatic stress as a way just to see if students are experiencing post-traumatic stress and whether they might need some additional support with that trauma. We also prepare students for what they're going to share with the group. And then in sessions 8 and 9, we actually have students identify a part of their journey that they want to share with the whole group. And our strong groups are usually about 6 to 8 students. And so they have the opportunity in these 2 sessions to share parts of their story. We do have warm-up activities that are a bit more about the students having an opportunity to share information or memories or favorite things from their home country, as well as any rituals or holidays that they like to celebrate. And we then, again, as I mentioned, we have the students share parts of their story. Okay, and we, of course, re-emphasize confidentiality and privacy. And we try to support the students as they support each other when they share the parts of their story. And then we have them reflect on sharing their narratives. We then have them extend their journey into the future and have them continuing to think about any goals they have for the upcoming year or for their near future or their far future. And then we close with a graduation. Again, we have them appreciate strengths in each other. We also do a trivia game to consolidate their knowledge. We have Jeopardy. For younger students, we sometimes use bingo. And we have them close with a skills for success, where they get to identify what skills they used. And of course, we want to celebrate their accomplishments with Strong by sharing a certificate. And we usually wrap up with some kind of celebration, food or party, and a certificate for them. So we want to, again, invite you to look through the Strong materials and think about whether this is something that can help support the newcomers in your schools. We do have many implementation sites you can see here across the US and across Canada. And we invite you to be a part of that Strong family. And as I mentioned, we also have partners now over in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Ukraine. You can see here again, this was just a couple of weeks ago. One of our trainees, many of the trainees were Ukrainian psychologists, and here is one here who was trained to be a trainer in Strong. So they are available to provide some training in Strong, and we can also support that effort as well. So we want to thank you so much for the time today, for allowing us to share a little bit about the Strong intervention, and we hope that it can be helpful in your work. And I'm going to ask our interpreters if there are any questions in the chat that we can attend to now. And I see some thanks in the chat, so thank you all for attending, and thank you for your thanks. And if you have any questions, we will be here for a few minutes now, so please let us know if you have any questions. In the meantime, I'm going to put my email in the chat box so that you can reach out if you have any questions about the training.
Дуже дякую, Шерон і Колін. Дуже багато інформації. І, шановні учасники, ви бачили, що дуже було багато інформації на слайдах. Всі слайди, всі презентації будуть доступні для вас. Також буде підручник доступний за посиланням, яке було в чаті. Якщо ви його загубили, то ми будемо все одно надсилати вам на пошту нагадування, ви зможете з усіма матеріалами ознайомитися. Мені здається, було таке питання стосовно участі у навчанні, як можна пройти навчання. Якщо, можливо, Шерон і Колін, якби ви пояснили такий алгоритм, да? Тобто як це відбувається. Наприклад, викладач хоче взяти участь у проєкті. Що йому для цього потрібно зробити? Просто сконтактувати з вами, чи, можливо, це збирається якась група, чи, можливо, треба якесь фінансування залучати, да? І так далі, щоб просто розуміти такий алгоритм дій.
So, good question. The materials are all available for free, and they are currently available in multiple languages, in English, Spanish, French, Ukrainian, and Czech. The parent materials are available in about 12 languages, but the manual itself is available in those 5 languages. And educators and mental health clinicians are welcome to download the materials and to use some of the strategies with new students. We can do a training, but we would need a site to actually host the training. And if it's delivered by us, it would be in English. And so there would need to be interpretation if the trainees were Ukrainian speakers. We can also see about partnering with the groups that we've trained, especially in the Czech Republic, because we've trained probably about 20 Ukrainian psychologists at this point who have moved from Ukraine to the Czech Republic in this last year. They've now been trained in Strong. And so I know that they are planning on doing trainings for Strong within the Czech Republic, but they also may be available to do it virtually at least. So we could talk with them. And if you're interested, feel free to go ahead and send me an email about that. Any other questions?
Так, дуже дякую. Якщо буде можливість поширити таку ж інформацію з Education USA Ukraine, ми також будемо раді долучитися до поширення інформації про ваші навчання або тренінги для того, щоб запросити більше зацікавлених осіб. Наразі у нас немає запитань в чаті, є дуже багато коментарів подяки. Дійсно, була дуже змістовна сесія, актуальна, на жаль, актуальна в даний момент для багатьох українських викладачів і освітян. Шановні учасники, давайте, можливо, ще одну хвилинку для запитань. Можете підняти руку, якщо у вас є запитання, або написати його в чаті. Стосовно технічних моментів, так, запис буде. Я ще раз давайте поділюсь з вами посиланням на сайт. На цьому сайті будуть всі оновлення для того, щоб вони не губилися. Якщо ви не отримали раптом емейл від нас, то на цьому сайті буде обновлятися інформація і завжди буде на першому місці актуальний вебінар, а всі інші будуть в записі і всі матеріали також за посиланням будуть доступні. Можете його для себе зберегти і користуватися. Наші зустрічі щовівторка. Це 3-я зустріч всього. Дякую, Шерон, за посилання на матеріали також. Всього передбачено 10 вебінарів, тобто у нас залишається ще 7 зустрічей.
And I should note that the Strong training, we went through it very quickly, the overall content, but the training itself usually takes about a day and a half to 2 days because we go over the content in a lot more detail, and there's also opportunities for participants to practice all of the skills so that they're ready when they are implementing Strong in the school setting.
Дуже багато слів подяки. Дуже вам дякую. Дійсно, можливо, наразі запитань немає, але якщо вони будуть, ви можете написати Шерон на пошту, так, або якщо загубили, то контактуйте з нами, і ми тоді направимо ваше запитання до наших експертів. Я думаю, що ми можемо підводити такий невеличкий підсумок. Дякую всім за участь, дякую, що приєдналися, дякую за ваш час. У нас така велика різниця в часі між нашими експертами Шерон і Колін, але вони все одно дуже багато приділили і розповіли про свою програму, і я сподіваюся, що ви зацікавилися і будете продовжувати навчання в цьому напрямку. Чи хотіли б щось додати, Шерон, Колін?
I just want to say thank you again, Oksana, and to your organization for hosting us. And just know that our hearts are with you all. We think of you every day and hope that you are safe and healthy. And I hope to be in Ukraine again one day in the future. So be well, and please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you for all that you're doing to support young people and families in Ukraine and beyond.
I will just ditto that and say thank you so much for spending this time with us and investing in how you can support all the kids and families that you touch professionally, and also hopefully find some things that might be helpful for you as well as you're making your way through this challenging time, and the hope that, like Sharon, that we will all be together in the Ukraine someday and be able to meet in person and to hear about the supports that you were able to use and the strengths that you built on as you managed through this and are able to continue this very important work. So thank you for the opportunity.
Дякую вам, дякуємо за ваш час. Шановні учасники, дякую, що приєднали сьогодні, і тоді очікуємо вас побачити наступного вівторка. Всім гарного вечора і до побачення.
Дякую, до